sorry, how would I, to what?
How would you advise others to respond to those who are apathetic?
Oh, we're just asking how would I advise those to respond to those who are apathetic? As I answer that, let me turn it back to me just for a moment, not you personally, but can you give me some examples of some encounters you've had with apathy? And you can be honest if it's with yourself, and I think we all feel this occasionally. And so I think if we can maybe come up with some examples, then it might help to give you some strategies to deal with that. One is not to ignore it, I would say that. Does anybody have anything happen recently, Brandon?
Yeah, discussions about politics, where people say, I don't care what the candidate is, they're all the same, that sort of thing.
Right, okay, so one is, especially in the middle of a very salient political time like this, you probably have folks, and maybe you feel this way too, that none of it matters. That's a good example. What else? Yes?
I'm in an urban problems class, and we've been discussing race and social inequality in schools. And there are several people who are like, well, what does it matter to me that schools are equal?
These white folks primarily, you said, yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, those of you who know, that race is something that I didn't talk a lot about in this talk, but this is my primary research interest in. For white folks, it's a very difficult thing. There's a lot of guilt associated with it, there's a lot of denial associated with it, and the apathy helps, as I said, that warm blanket, it keeps us comfortable so we don't have to deal with those types of things. And in fact, you can see sort of a manifestation of this by looking at the urban sprawl white flight phenomenon. White folks who had the meetings moved out to places like Naperville so they could avoid being confronted on a daily basis, in part. They also want a bigger land and stuff too. But they avoid being confronted on a daily basis with those type of problems and still play urban settings. And so that's certainly one too that if we're sensitive to, it's hard. Anything else? How about one more and then we'll try to go ahead.
Hate speech used casually,
Hate
like
speech.
calling things gay.
Right. Good, exactly. So we see that a lot, and actually, in my, again, I've been a professor for 10 years, and I've seen more of a return to it. In fact, it seemed like 10 years ago, students were more conscious about using words like retarded or gay in derogatory ways, and it seems to have moved in a different direction. So that's interesting. More meaning was follow up.
I was just going to say, environmental issues, I'm not going to be here when it all goes.
Well, that's true too. Right, exactly, sure. And again, I think it comes back to this attack on intellectualism because in practical terms, that's true. I can't see the earth getting warmer. I can't see the landfills getting filled up. I can't, it doesn't seem tangible. And so anybody that's sort of concerned about these things that we can't put a hand on is sort of out there in the stratosphere somewhere. And not only are they that, but they look down on the rest of us for being grounded for it. And so your question is a quite difficult one, and that is the direct response to apathy. My argument would be love. That's tricky because what the fastest way to turn off conversation is for you to make someone feel like you're talking down to them. And so using this approach like, man, you're an idiot. Really? Really? That's what you think? Professor Caliendo said you're stupid. That's not going to get you too far. I think engaging people in dialogue, I use that term very purposefully, dialogue. If you listen to, if you watch television, especially political television or talk radio, what passes for dialogue is debate. They're not the same thing. When someone says they want to engage in a dialogue, what they really seem to be trying to do is to change the other person's mind. I listen to Sean Hannity sometimes. I keep some of you know I write a blog every week on race and politics and so to keep up with time and things, I try to listen to multiple perspectives. And one of the things Sean Hannity does when he gets a caller who disagrees with him, he takes them. He doesn't sort of scream them out. And he'll talk to them for a while and ask them questions, which appears to be engaging in dialogue. And at some point, he'll say something, and really I'm paraphrasing, but it's very close to a quote. At some point he says, well, Michelle, I'm not going to convince you, so, and that's it. As if the only point of entertaining her call was to convince her of something. When Frere's talking about putting students at the center of education, he's implicitly trying to talk about breaking the hierarchy between teacher and student, so that both are open to both teaching and learning. And that's what dialogue is about. It's about an honest and genuine exchange of ideas, where there's a potential for both parties to have growth. And that has to happen, but you have to have genuine respect and love for one another. You can't sort of just say, I know I'm right, because, you know, I had ethics with Professor Hollis, and now I know how to be ethical, and so I'm going to tell you. I hope he's hiding. So the answer then to your question is talk and listen. Because I think often if we're confronted with this, you know, in Brandon's situation or with your situation, I think that the idea here is to say, I'm judging that, right? Which is exactly, I think, what we ought not do. I think we need to ask the questions why people feel the way they do. One of the things that was, I think, remarkable, pardon me, about Barack Obama's speech on March 18th was that he was not simply explaining one side or the other. He was telling whites and blacks that there's a good reason for the resentment on both sides. Not whitey's wrong about everything, not leave the darkies out there that don't know what they're doing and they're crazy radicals. It wasn't something like that. He was being very thoughtful about the fact that the pain is real, the frustration, the resentment is real, and if we're going to get to the root of it, we have to listen. But getting to the root isn't always the easiest thing to do, and it's not always a welcome thing. I mean, the term radical means getting to the root of something, but that's not how we use it, is it? We use it to mean extreme. Very few of you would describe yourselves as radicals. But really, if you want to fundamentally change problems and bring about social justice, you must be radical. You want to get to the roots. You can't just keep chopping off the top of the weeds all the time. We've been doing that for a long time. Okay, does that help a little? It wasn't a manual for how to deal with apathy. So, yeah, no, you better ask me a question and expect a direct answer. Any other questions or any other thoughts? What else would you like to talk? It doesn't have to be a question. You really have any thoughts you want to talk about that I prompted? Yes, ma'am.
John Garner wrote that he believed that apathy, especially in the political arena, didn't exist, that it was actually a disconnect between what the leaders were talking about and what like the general population would rather talk about. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think that the statement would be factual if apathy is defined in the colloquial sense as we've been using it. I think if I try to broaden the construction to think about it as sort of the flip side of love, I think that is real. That word gets described most often to young folks with regard to politics. And I think that's cyclical in a lot of ways. I mean, in a sense, you can make the argument that politicians aren't sort of speaking to issues that are uniquely of concern to young folks because young folks aren't participating. Okay? But I think the other side of that argument, one that nobody ever wants to sort of pick up, is maybe young folks would be more interested if politicians were talking about things that were of unique concern to young folks. So, you know, just like you can't say there's men's issues and women's issues and white issues and black issues, there may be issues that are of unique concern or a disproportionate concern to some communities, and that's the case with young folks too. You care about the economy and healthcare and the war and all those things. But what about music file sharing? You care about that. I mean, there's people your age getting sued all over the place for ridiculous sums of money as a result of sharing music. And lots of you probably have really legitimate thoughts, concerns, fears, desires. Maybe some of you are musicians and you're making real decisions on how to deal with this change in the music industry. When's the last time you heard in any debates, in any press releases, anything once, anybody talk about intellectual property with respect to music file sharing or movie file sharing or movie sharing? Never. Nothing. It's only one issue. I'm using one example. And I don't think that bringing that up will change the world, but I do think it's an example of that disconnect, that there's definitely a gap there. And that's for young folks, and you can talk about other issues, you know, the NASCAR dads have their problems, and sort of the older women have their problems, and young black males have a set of problems that are different from young black females. We get all that. And so you might argue that it's impossible for politicians to connect, but when you think about the number of public officials there are, multiply that through the years, and wonder why people aren't talking to young folks, it's quite surprising, I think. So I guess I would agree in part and disagree in part. Once again,